Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
I feel in general for people who are in ministry work, who are outreach to people, who are in service and so on, that's probably one of the great secrets of it, is to have one's own needs under enough control, one's own problems in perspective enough, so that one is able to cross over to the other person, listen to the other person, empathize with them.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Mary Beth Kirchner, who is a former producer of the Reflections program. Today, Father Bacik and Miss Kirchner will be discussing a personal reflection on the priesthood. Now, here's Father Bacik.
Mary Beth, I'm glad to have a chance to have you on this program here, since it's a lot of your initiative that has put me on the radio in the first place. And
my fault, huh?
It's all your fault that I have to do all of these programs. You and your husband, Mark, it seems to me, back about 4 years ago, initiated this whole idea. And since then, I think I've done a couple hundred programs.
Unbelievable, I know.
And so I thought it would be nice, my original plan was to get you on here and to see if we could talk a little bit about communications.
Well, you know, though, for many years I've been anxious to do the following, and that is, for so long you've been talking to other people about what their specialty is, and no one has turned the tables and talked about you.
Well, if anyone's allowed to turn the tables, I guess it's you, Mary Beth, since you had so much to do with getting me into this whole business.
Well, that's the situation today, and I think we should spend some time talking about you who have hosted this show for several years now, and we're getting to know you in all kinds of different fields outside of your own specialty, and let's spend a little time getting to know who you are.
I can't resist.
I mean, after knowing you for several years now, there's still a lot of questions that I have, and let's spend some time talking about them now. I think one of the basic questions that most people would have, including myself for you, would be tracing the beginnings of your vocational choice and why you chose to become a priest. How come?
You've asked me a question that I always answer very poorly. It is a very mysterious thing to me how I ended up in this particular vocation in life. I'm sure a whole lot of that has to do with my family. My family was a very religious family. It's always seemed to me in a very healthy way, not ostentatious about it, but there were deep values and so on. I think a certain concern was given to me for a sense of service to the larger community. I suppose I met in my own training growing up in Catholic schools and so on, met people who were somehow impressive or dedicated. But when it comes down to the actual dynamics of all of it, it really isn't very clear to me how I ended up in this position. I know that there were times when there was a tremendous soul-searching about it. I remember long retreats in which I spent many hours and in a great deal of darkness and mystery, I would say, trying to figure that out, what I was going to do, whether I could really move in this direction or not. Some of the things that are clear to me would be that along the line that it's worked out for me better than I would have anticipated. I know in my own pre-visioning of the future, it seemed to me that it would be a very difficult path to follow, and there would be a lot of conflicts involved and so on.
How so?
I think especially in terms of the question of freedom and how free I would be to operate within the confines of the Catholic Church. I grew up in a family where I think freedom was celebrated and where there was a rather healthy outlook on laws and strictures and institutions and so on, and there was a great emphasis on freedom in my family, and I believe that it was not clear to me that I would ever be able to have that kind of freedom within the Catholic Church. I think I anticipated a lot of conflicts with the institution and so on, and I think that in the back of my mind was always the question, could I cope with those kind of restrictions on my own freedom, my own intellectual inquiry, my own sense of lifestyle, and so on.
Sounds like that was a big risk for you to take then. I mean, that's a lifelong vocational choice, and to have that many doubts going in, what made you still go ahead with it?
that, I think, is the mysterious point. I've never understood and never been able to articulate well. I think you said that well. I mean, I had a clear sense of the lifelong character of it and the difficulties that would be involved in doing it. I spent a lot of time pre-visioning that, of anticipating what it would be like, and I know that it created in me often a very dark mood, a heavy sense of it, and yet there was some reason within me that said, well, I could manage that or function effectively anyway. But I think the happier note is that it hasn't turned out to be as grim as I anticipated it. I think a whole lot of that has to do with the changes that came with the Second Vatican Council, where we got a greater openness. I was ordained in 1962. That's the year the council started. That's before all of these changes really occurred in the church. And I know my own excitement about all of that. I can remember the preaching about the council and giving talks all over about change coming and how the church was going to be opened up and how there was going to be new opportunities for all of us. Now, we had to get ready for it, and I spent so much of my time and energy in the early 60s trying to help people prepare for the changes that I could see were coming, and especially by helping people to understand that we hadn't always done it in this way, that many of the changes were anticipated in the early church. What we were doing is recovering a sense of the history of the primitive church and trying to recover the riches that we found there, and many of what appeared to be new ways of doing things were actually the very traditional ways reinstituted in the church. So a lot of my time and energy went into that, and of course I was personally thrilled with that, because what it did was open up the situation in the church and gave greater latitude and scope for one's ministry and activities and lifestyle and ways of interacting with people and so on. So it turned out that many of my strongest forebodings about the ministry and functioning as a priest were undercut by the Second Vatican Council, and opened up a situation where I feel much more comfortable than I had anticipated.
I'm sure as a young priest you're in a very unpopular position many times when you were preaching about the new church and what were the changes that were to come. How did you deal with that? How did you approach that?
Well, that was a very difficult time in many ways, although the dominant sense for me was one of exhilaration, because I was excited about it and because I felt as though I had sort of an early intuition, maybe before some people, of where it might be going, and it became my dominant interest. But there were difficulties. There were some people who resisted really strongly and felt personally attacked. It very often became an emotional thing. I mean, there was a lot of times when I gave talks in those days when the audience would really be hostile. There would be people in there, yelling at me or attacking me or saying that I was not loyal to the church or that I was a heretic or something like that. That didn't happen every day, but there were particular talks, particular audiences that stand out in my own mind. And what I did in that case is something that I guess I've learned to do throughout my life, and that was to gear down in those situations. I move into a lower gear when that happens. I have trained myself, and I think it occurred in those days, to not take those attacks personally, but to try to focus on what's behind them. I have a little cassette tape that goes off in my head when that happens that says, what is this person's problem that's causing them to act in this way? What is their problem? And I found that to be a very effective device or technique, approach, because what it does is it keeps one from feeling personally attacked. I mean, I knew it wasn't just me that they were after, but that they were upset. They were venting their own emotion, usually their insecurity about a changing situation, and of this insecurity that had to be tapped into and understood. That was very real, and one could understand it. And I found out if psychologically I could reverse myself and gear myself for that, then I wouldn't feel personally attacked, and therefore I could respond reasonably. I can remember one time when it was not like that at all, where I wasn't geared up. I remember I had given a talk the previous night. As a matter of fact, I was in a different city, and I gave a talk the previous night to a really hostile group, and they sort of started a chant or something, for the Pope or against him. It was a very difficult situation, and But it didn't bother me at all. I was very at ease. And the next day, I had Mass in a parish, and I gave a rather innocuous sermon on John the Baptist as a prophet and so on. And I thought it went all right. I felt fairly good about the Mass. And I was in the sacristy in the back afterwards, and some very neatly dressed gentleman came up to me and very calmly and even-tempered looked at me, and he said, "You're a disgrace to the cloth."
Wow.
And at that point, it really touched me. He got to me. And I remember feeling very emotional about it and being upset about it. So the point I guess I'm making is that the reason I was able to handle whatever criticism there was is that I could gear down, that I could be prepared for it, and that I could turn the question around. And the cases when I couldn't do that, then I would feel it personally, and then I would not respond well.
You know, so many times, so much you're talking about here is your own self-motivation, self-counseling, so to speak. And I've often wondered, all the time that you spend as a campus minister and in counseling others and listening to others' problems, etc., when you feel yourself that there are things that are burdening you, what do you do?
Well, I suppose if there's one thing that helps me in that case, it is that somehow there is a God-given gift there that keeps my own needs in bounds very often. It seems as though I am able to turn those off when I'm sitting there listening to people, at least to a degree. I mean, no one can do that completely, and there's no technique involved in that for me. It's just something that it appears to work naturally for me. My only response to it is to thank the Lord that I'm able to sit there and listen to someone else without interjecting very often my own problems or needs into the discussion. I feel in general for people who are in ministry work, who are outreach to people, who are in service and so on, that's probably one of the great secrets of it, is to have one's own needs under enough control, one's own problems in perspective enough so that one is able to cross over to the other person, listen to the other person, empathize with them. One of the things I try to do with that is, and something I do consciously fight, is what one might call a Messiah complex. That is the sense that I've got to jump in and solve people's problems. And that goes on with me periodically. I'll be sitting there listening, and suddenly I want to solve it all. And I then play one of those tapes in my head again that says, beware of the Messiah complex. I mean, relax, take it easy. The first step is to understand and to empathize and to make sure you're with the person. And maybe there will be no concrete way to really help them. And you can't jump in and short-circuit the process. Many people have to just work their way through it. They have to learn themselves. You can't stop that whole process. So that is something I sort of consciously work at throughout. But the other business of just sort of being able to listen is strictly a gift from the Lord. And I don't know, I'm not saying how well I do that, but to whatever degree I do it, it is because it's a blessing. It's not something I learned or cultivated or anything. It's just there.
So much of the counseling that you do is done in the campus environment, and that you spent the last 15 years, right?
Mm-hmm, something like that.
Let's talk about your experience as a campus minister and what's been its greatest rewards for you. Well,
the campus ministry work has been a good situation for me because it's in the academic environment, and that's an environment that I like. I like the intellectual life. I like the challenge that comes. I like the flow of ideas. I like the excitement that is sometimes generated in that world. And therefore, I'm very open to that world. It's compatible with my own sensibility. So I have an initial sort of liking for it. And also, I think that the young people very often bring a refreshing candor and honesty to it. So it's remarkable to hear them talk about their problems very often. Not always. Some are very reticent and bound in, and just like many of us adults are. But on the other hand, there has been a freshness and an openness about all of it. Many of the problems that I've dealt with over the year have been questions of faith development, doubts and uncertainties, and trying to figure out how to relate to the church. And that's an area I'm trained in, that I have background in, have done my own academic work in. And so I feel very comfortable with that. And I'm happy when those kinds of faith questions come up. And you probably see more of those arise in the academic world and among students than you would find in the population as a whole. I suppose the other thing that one finds is that there is a great personal search, an attempt to look for personal development and growth among young people. And very often they're dealing with obstacles or blockages to that. And if one can uncover those obstacles, point them out, help them to cut through them, see them, and so on, then very often it's opened up and the growth occurs on its own in a way. And it's, I guess, sort of exciting to see people who have taken hold and done well. Periodically I will get letters back from students, or they'll stop in or so on. And so many of them have done well. I mean, they've just taken hold of their lives. They've become productive citizens. They've figured out how to relate to the church in a healthy way. I mean, when someone comes back to me and says, boy, I'm in such and such a parish and I'm involved and I've helped them get lay distributors and I teach in a CCD program, I think, terrific. So that I suppose a lot of whatever, if it's satisfactions or whatever, it's in seeing people take hold of their own lives and move forward with it. I think, too, that a lot of my own good feeling about it has been the interaction with the faculty and administrators, people who are generally open and engage in civil discourse and like ideas, and my interaction with those people has been, tremendous. I treasure that, and have met so many good people over the years, amazing people who are dedicated and take a humane approach to students who try to bring a religious dimension to their whole work on campus. So those people impress me a lot, and I often find great stimulation in that. And I might just add one more thing with that, and that is the stimulation I have felt in the ecumenical interaction. Campuses are terrific for that, and there's a greater openness between Catholics and Protestants and Jews and interacting. And very often I have found some sort of almost mysterious stimulation in that interaction. When I'm at meetings with my counterparts in the Protestant ministry, or when we pray together and so on, it's a very deeply moving experience for me, something I've never articulated well. But there's a special stimulation that comes from it, a sort of excitement. I think probably maybe being, again, on the leading edge of where we might be going in terms of unity as Christians.
Of course, Jim Bacik, the theologian, also comes into play in all these situations that we've been talking about. What is that side of you like? How does that differ from who you are as a campus minister day to day?
Well, my theological life is sort of an odd one. That is, I don't do the kind of research that is needed anymore to be a leading figure in the theological world. In other words, I'm so involved in the pastoral world and counseling and liturgy and trying to build up a parish and so on, that the amount of research or creative work that I can do is limited or practically non-existent. So I've had the opportunity to study in the past and to learn some theology, to do my own strict academic work, and to write about my mentor, Karl Rahner, and so on, to deepen myself. But I still ride on that now. That's work that I've done in the past. Now, what kind of work I do is as a popularizer. I don't fit in exactly into the academic theological model. When I'm with the academic theologians, I bring a different dimension to it. I'm not embarrassed about that, or I don't apologize for it. In fact, I think it often enriches the discussion, but it's clear that I'm different from them. I'm not doing the day-to-day scientific research that they're doing, but on the other hand, I'm in touch with the church world, the world as a whole, the pastoral ministry, the real problems of people in a way that they're not. And very often, I think at least what I try to do theologically strikes people as being more in tune with the real world. So the odd thing about me is I'm in two worlds. I know two worlds: the real pastoral world of taking care of a parish and being an associate pastor, a co-pastor now, and the academic world that I once lived in, and so on. So I end up maybe not being terribly good in either one, But the fact is that I bridge that a bit. I know both of those worlds. And many of the academic theologians, they might help out at a parish on weekends and think they know parish life, but very often they don't. They don't really know what it's like to be in the trenches or right there where people's problems are. So that's a trade-off with me. It's one I've consciously made. I mean, you cannot do pastoral work as I do it and keep up with all the literature, read all the books that you would need to be at the forefront of the theological world. Now, I was invited to talk to the College Theology Society recently, and I gave a talk there, and it was, I think, remarkably well received because I did it on the basis of my own pastoral experience and then using the theological tools that I had gained in the past in studying the theology of Karl Rahner in some depth. And in fact, that talk is going to be published before long in one of the journals. But so it's still, I can be in that world and be fairly comfortable, I'd say quite comfortable, but it sounds different. If you heard the other papers at the conference, they would sound very different from the paper that I presented.
You know, you'd mentioned to me several times, and I think many people who know you well know that Karl Rahner was a major influence in your life in helping you obtain that balance between the pastoral and the academic in your life. I recall once reading in one of the articles that you'd written, your Reflections articles, that you'd asked Karl Rahner what was his greatest religious experience. Mm-hmm. And what I'm curious is what your response would be to that question.
That's really difficult. I'm as taken aback as he was. No one ever asked me that before either, I guess. And when I asked him that, he didn't know what to say at first and was very taken aback, and I guess I'm in the same kind of position. I'm hard-pressed to answer it. I mean, I don't function that way. I don't have, like on a particular date when I met the Lord in a particular way and that has changed my life. It isn't like that for me. I know that often when I'm in my giving exercises to people, I try to do them myself, like look for an experience where you think that the Spirit was at work. I notice that a lot of times they relate to my relationship with my father, and I think that is true for many people. And I will go to those experiences as sort of the substratum or the base for uncovering the Spirit. Very often they are experiences that are very ordinary, just like an ordinary encounter with my father when he got very angry at me one time, and then we patched it up and it went on and so on. And to me that somehow is a characteristic of the spiritual life. It's the way I see much of religious experience. I mean, I've had some good moments in the chapel, and especially saying the Stations of the Cross. There was a time in my life when that seemed to do well, and I can remember some moments that seemed to really come across to me, and a rather striking, what I thought, strong experience of God, the presence of God, and so on. I can remember a few times when the liturgy, well, I would say often when the liturgy lifts me out of myself, and when I feel somehow the presence of the Spirit, especially as mediated by the congregation, almost flowing from the congregation, that will often happen to me at Mass. I've had sometimes with nature, especially with the ocean, where there has been a rather strong sense of the presence of the Lord, and it's been a good catalyst for my prayer and so on. And I would say that sometimes in very stimulating conversation that will happen with me, personal interactions with people, stimulating conversation, and then I should wind this up, but I suppose the other time is that when I'm with people who are hurting badly and grieving greatly, and a lot of times there's very few words passed, or I don't really know what to say, and maybe I will just hug the person, and but very often that seems to be a mediating factor for me, and recognizing something about the graciousness of God. So that, well, that's a potpourri, I suppose, and it's not sharply drawn. I don't have, one experience or one very clear-cut one, but those would be some of the areas that I think have mediated presence of the Lord for me.
so much more to cover and talk about. I wish we had more time, but I suppose as we wrap things up, I'm curious to know what lies ahead for you. What kind of plans you have for yourself if you could set your own goals for the future? What would you want to do?
I seem to be asked that quite frequently. I have a general kind of answer that I don't seem to have great plans for the future. I don't seem to operate that way with great goals or 5-year plans or where I'd like to be in so many years and so on. I live much more on an ad hoc basis. That is, I got to figure out what to lecture about this fall, and I'll work on that and prepare those lectures, and that's it. And some people will call me up and want me to counsel them in the near future, and I will try to do that, and I will celebrate the liturgy. I seem to work more like that on a day-to-day basis. So I can't summon up any long-range goals that I have or so on. I mean, I think that it would be good for me to keep writing. I don't really feel like doing that, but it seems like it would be good for me. It'd probably be wise for me to publish a book or two and try to pull my thoughts together. I'd like to keep teaching. That would be an important thing for me. But right now I'm concerned about building up Corpus Christi Parish at the University of Toledo. Mary Beth, you've been dominating this discussion. Usually this is my program, and I take the lead. And
I was going to say,
so
you're not a bad guest. I'll
be back on this program again. Anyway, Mary Beth, I got to take the last few seconds to thank you again for being with me today, and especially being encouraging. You are leaving the Toledo area soon, and you will be greatly missed by many people here, and it's a good chance for me to thank you and your husband, Mark, for helping me and being so supportive of me and really leading me in the direction of doing more with the media. Thank you.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Mary Beth Kirchner, a former producer of the Reflections program. The topic of this week's show, a personal reflection on the priesthood. Comments or questions on this show or suggestions for future topics should be sent to Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Ministry, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Campaign of the Diocese of Toledo.